All right, we're going to start here. Welcome. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. My name is Judd Hendricks, and this is Interfaith Paths to Peace. This is a workshop on Enneagram Spirituality, and I'm so excited. I've got the big screen up, and you see all of these beautiful faces together. We are trying to form a Enneagram Community of Practice, and so I do want everybody to know that on Fridays, starting in June, we are going to have a Enneagram Community of Practice every Friday at 3 o'clock. So we'll have all kinds of different programs related to the Enneagram. It's going to be a great time. So put that on your calendar and make note. July 9th, we're actually having an Enneagram and money workshop, which will be really interesting, how different Enneagrams address the issue of money. So today is Enneagram and Spirituality, and I've got a screen share that I'm going to do, and we'll jump into talking about the Enneagram and Spirituality. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. I am going to mute everybody at the beginning. We do want to have comments, and if you're watching on Facebook Live, welcome. You're welcome to ask questions or make comments as well as we get started. One of the things, before we began, we broke into small groups and hold on one second, and introduced ourselves. One of the things that we're trying to build is a sense of community here online to do this work of the Enneagram. Here we go. So the reason the specific topic on the Enneagram and spirituality is I really feel like the Enneagram is a wisdom path for personal growth. And there's been a lot of work done around the Enneagram. And I do believe it's actually a spiritual path because it deals with some of the deeper issues of who we are as people. And today's emphasis is going to be specifically understanding the Enneagram related to a spiritual path and how we connect with the transcendence. So I want to, I'm taking some work. One of the ways I understand spiritual growth or personal growth are different practices. And this is what I would call an integral approach to human growth and spirituality. And the way I want to frame the Enneagram is talking about it in some different ways of looking at personal growth. And I describe these as the three realms of consciousness. And so there are what I call the upper realm, the middle world, and the lower world. So there are different types of spiritual practices that go to cultivate these different worlds or these different parts of who we are. And I'll just kind of quickly show you what those are. The first is what we call the upper world. And upper world practices mainly deal with what I would call transpersonal states of consciousness. So it's not dealing with, this is, you know, like in the Lord of the Rings where all the mystical beings live, they call that the upper world. And so these are practices that help us connect with the transcendent. And we may call that God, Christ consciousness, Buddha mind, nirvana. When people talk about blissing out, they move into a transpersonal realm. So it's not personal, it includes the personal, but it transcends that. And there's certain kind of practices that go along with this world. And so if we want to focus on this world, we do things like meditation, prayer, contemplation, some forms of yoga that are inviting us to change the state of our consciousness. So like in worship service, for example, you may feel, you know, connected to God or have a sense of yourself is larger. It's transpersonal. And that's a really important area of practice. That's not really what the Enneagram does, though. The Enneagram really focuses on what we call the middle world. And the middle world is this everyday consciousness. It's everyday practice. It's where we normally spend our time. And this deals actually with the ego. So it's not transcending the ego. It's actually working with the ego as it is. And this is the realm of family, community, personal growth, like education. And there's certain kind of practices we can do that cultivate the middle world. And that's, for example, the Enneagram work, because the Enneagram is working with our personality traits. It's not wanting us to transcend necessarily our personality. It's wanting us to work with our personality so that we can function better in culture. And so we do a lot of work here. There's another world, what I call the lower world, and I think all of these realms are very important. The lower world is, this is Dante's Inferno. So you remember Dante goes deep into the cave. He goes into the underworld. And the underworld really is the level of pre-conscious, or that which is subconscious. So it may have arisen into consciousness, but it's been repressed or forgotten. So it is personal in one way, because it would be shadow material. It would be working with what we call the underworld, the shadow. It could also be, though, repressed collective conscious material. And that's a Jungian concept, that whatever doesn't show up in consciousness in our communities is collective shadow. And there are certain practices that we need to do for personal shadow work and for collective shadow work. And that's what we call dream work, active imagination, shamanic journeying. So there are all of these practices that go along with these three realms of spiritual practice. And we may call all of them, personal growth or spiritual practice. I wanted to show you this because I really think it's important for those of us that want to grow as human beings. I encourage everybody to take a practice from one of these areas and really focus on it. That's what we call integral practice. So choose a practice from the upper world: meditation, yoga, prayer, contemplation. Take a practice from the middle world: coaching, psychotherapy, Enneagram work. Enneagram work is a great practice for the middle world. And then the lower world. And, are you doing shadow work? That's the other forms of psychotherapy, dream work, active imagination. So what I really encourage and what we teach on personal growth is really focusing on practices at these three different levels of who we are as people. Another way I like to talk about that is, do you have practices for function, flow, and glow? And here, imagine that you are a stained glass window, okay? So you are this stained glass window. You look down at yourself and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a stained glass window. So if you look down and you see that there's a pane in you that's shattered, that's broken, and you want to replace that pane. So you take out that broken part and you get a pane that's not broken and you put it inside of you. That's called therapy. That's function, what I would call function work. In other words, you do it because you want to function better in the world. A lot of times our brokenness comes out and hurts other people. Our own hurts hurt others. And so there are what we call functional practices, and they're very important that we replace those parts of us that are broken. But there are other kinds of practices. So let's say you look down at yourself and you see that you're dirty, or you've got a film on you and the light doesn't flow through you very well. And you take a cloth and you wipe off that who you are so the light flows through you better. Those are what we call flow practices. And that's a lot like creativity. That's a lot, do you allow light and energy to flow through you? That's tantric practice. That's energy work practice. Those don't have anything necessarily to do with being broken, right? So like you could look down and your pieces are shattered, but the light still flows through you. In fact, a lot of our great artists are shattered, right? They have deep psychological brokenness, but they still flow with creativity. So what I'm saying, these are different levels of practice. So we need to be skillful in our means to have function practices, flow practices. And those are different kinds of practices. And another thing is glow practices. So use the same imagery and you look down yourself. And the question here is, do you know you are the light that flows through you? Right? You might not flow well, but you know you're light. And a lot of our great sages, Ramana Maharishi, which we're going to have a quote from in just a moment. I mean, that guy was in a cave all of his life. But you walked into that cave and you woke up because he knew he was light. He knew he was pure consciousness. Now, he was very broken. Actually, the guy didn't have really human relationships, right? So he didn't function well in society. And he may not have necessarily flowed well, but he knew he was light. He was awake. So this is really important. When we start talking about spiritual practice, a lot of times we are talking about, do you know that you are life itself, that you are consciousness? But just because you know that doesn't mean you might be healthy interpersonally. In fact, we know a lot of people that are awake that still have all kind of shadow material. So they don't have good relationships, and yet they know they're light, right? So integral practice is really important. And I wanted to share that because Enneagram work does some things really well, but it doesn't do other things really well. It's specifically looking at our ego structure. So are there any questions or thought about any of that before we go on? Feel free to jump in if you have a question or a comment before we actually start looking at the Enneagram. Any questions, comments, responses? Nope, you're ready to get into the Enneagram. Okay, let's get into the Enneagram. So I am specifically going to be looking at, I've talked about these resources before, Helen Palmer, Rizzo and Hudson, and Eli Jackson Bear. I'm specifically using, and I'm going to be doing some work with Jackson Eli Bear's book, From Fixation to Freedom. So if you want to go back, especially the first part of this presentation is taken from Jackson Eli Bear. But these are 3 resources I would highly recommend. But we're going to be specifically looking today at Jackson Eli Bear's work, From Fixation to Freedom. So this is the model of the human structure of the ego based upon Jackson Eli's book. So I want to share this with you because this will be kind of the basis of using the Enneagram as spiritual practice. So, I'm sorry. This is what the model that we're going to use to look at what does the Enneagram do and how can it function for us spiritually. So this is the Enneagram of the human, or this is the diagram of the human personality. It's got these 3 or 4 levels of depth. One is the outer shell. It's like an onion, which is where your personality resides. It's the outermost part that faces the world. And Jackson Eli Bear calls the personality, he says it's the personality is made up of patterns of either conditioned or genetic predispositions which encounter environmental and social circumstances. The personality involves 3 main bodies of manifestation. So there's a physical manifestation of it, an emotional, and a mental. Your personality is your story in which I identify myself and is made up of my behaviors, my feelings, and my thoughts. So this is the personality realm, and this is kind of the outer shell that we're going to be looking at with the Enneagram. So the Enneagram looks at these outer manifestations of behaviors, patterns of behaviors, often the Enneagram is described as a psychological typology that got put into place as young children tried to thrive and survive in early childhood environment. So their personality emerged, was built upon this sense of an identification as a separate self, which is another way of understanding the ego. So that's the outer level. Below the level of personality, though, is what we call your character fixation. And this is kind of the deepest, what we would call the ego knot is formed here. And character is a level of deeper than personality. This is where the knot of the ego resides. All thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of the personality arise from this core identification. It is at this level that the false sense of me, which is the root of all unhappiness, can be recognized and transcended. So what Jackson Eli Baer is offering us, he's saying that the Enneagram is the door, is the personality doorway into the ego knot, or the place of our fixation, where we first identified ourselves as something separate than consciousness itself. And I think this is really important. In Enneagram practice, we want to be able to take the Enneagram all the way down to that very moment when we had this sense of, I am separate from my environment. That is the birth of the ego. That is the birth of that thing that we identify with and call me. That's really the false story. Because the true sense of who we are is life itself, is the light that shines through us. Now, there is this thing called the ego, but it's not the full story. But the ego wants to be the full story. And so that's what spiritual practice is about. And the Enneagram can take us straight into that place where, as a child, we first had a fixation and we called something that arose me. And then that me became an I, and then that I took on a personality. So you see how that works. And Jackson Eli Baer is wanting to use the Enneagram to go to that very knot, which is the core. So I can answer some questions in a moment. This is what the Ramana Maharishi said. The personal entity which identifies its existence with life in the physical body and calls itself I is the ego. So often we call the I, the ego, the I maker. The ego is the I maker. The physical body, which is inherently inert, has no ego sense. So that's often why we talk about coming back to the body, because the body doesn't necessarily have an ego that it's trying to hold on to. It has just these feelings and sensations. But that's not the ego. The ego is what the mind does with those sensations by calling them me, and then having to protect them or having to continue them. The self, which is pure consciousness, has no ego sense. And between these two are the mysteriously arises the ego sense, which is the I thought. This ego, or separate personality identity, is at the root of all suffering. And this is the basic Buddhist principle. Because we not only have the I thought, but we think it's real. We think it's permanent. And we hold on to it as such. And that becomes the personality. So those of you that hate, in many ways, the Enneagram, like don't box me up, there's a real truth to that. Because we don't want to say the ego or the personality or your Enneagram type is really you. Because it's not really you. You are life itself. your love itself. Therefore, Ramana Ramashi says, therefore it is to be destroyed by all means. And this is what we call Advaitic or extreme non-duality. So there's a tradition in Hinduism called Advaitic thought, and it's called non-duality. And most of the non-dual theologians and spiritual practitioners say, unless you have an experience, a moksha experience, a samadhi experience of no self, then you're still always caught on the Enneagram wheel, so to speak. You're always over-identifying with a personality trait on the outer realm rather than the soul. So, back to what is the soul, what is the essence. This is Eli Baer. He says, the soul is consciousness crystallized into a more subtle form. So it's pure consciousness that's crystallized into a subtle form. It is the arising of I consciousness as an ephemeral body. It is the soul that reincarnates lifetimes after lifetime, searching for fulfillment, happiness, and God. So Jackson Eli Baer is coming out of a karmic, somewhat of a Hindu, non-Advaitic, or an Advaitic tradition. So it uses karma. When the soul is not enlightened and is burdened with an egoic identity, it is the storehouse of latent tendencies and unfulfilled desires that take birth in a new body. Those latent or transcendent or reincarnate energies are what some people would call are the archetypical energies around which the personality does get formed. The soul's identification with the body creates the egoic knot of character fixation. So it's the soul that identifies with the energies, the passions, the desires, the needs of the body that become the personality. That is what the Enneagram is looking at. Okay? So, true character, he says, arises at the level of the soul. It is the developed qualities of the soul's essence. True character is developed when one is willing to sacrifice personal pleasure of safety for something more important. To stand for what is known to be true in the face of fears and realizations of the character fixation. So, what we're trying to use the Enneagram to do is to see past all of the fixations that the soul has put on it to our true self. And some people would call that, use the concept of the true self. So this is Jackson Eli Baer of the true self, Baer's description of the true self. If souls are like sparks flying out into the infinite night, the true self is not only the spark, but also the night, the universe, and the field that the universe arises in. It is pure awareness. That's the true self. The cosmic joke is that the soul is made up of that which the soul is searching for. Immortal consciousness. So the soul is what it is searching for. Enlightenment is to realize that who you are essentially is the same immortal consciousness, pure consciousness itself. So God is in search of God's self through you. That's the way some monotheistic traditions say the same thing. So, and some people would say what Jesus woke up to was the reality that Jesus was God. And in doing that, he became the Christ. So what Siddhartha woke up to was that Siddhartha was pure consciousness. And in doing so, he became the awakened one, the Buddha. And in my experiences, this is what all of our true spiritual paths are teaching us, is that this journey that we're on is to wake up to the realization that we are light, that we are love, in search of ourselves. And a lot of people would say, stop searching and be here right now. Be completely and fully here right now and realize that you are consciousness itself. It just happens to be textured by all of your personality, by all of your history, by all of these messages, by all of this other stuff. That consciousness has been textured by all of that. But that's not ultimately and truly who you are. You are those things, and you have to take responsibility for those things, and that's what the Enneagram's trying to get you to do. But don't get stuck in thinking you are an Enneagram number. That's your fixation. And you better take responsibility for it, because it may be hurting you and it may be hurting other people. It may not be helping you function. And that is what the Enneagram's trying to do. But so Enneagram spirituality really wants to say the Enneagram is a doorway to your true self, but don't stop at the doorway. Okay? Wow, that's good stuff. So let's take a moment to stop and let's have some comments, questions. Let's have some dialogue before we actually jump into. I'm going to tell you where we are going. We're actually going to look at all of the Enneagram numbers and talk about spiritual practices, or what you need to be aware of on your spiritual growth. So, but before we do that, let's jump into what we just talked about. Comments, thoughts, reflections. Disagreements. Again, that's Jackson Eli Bear. He may be very wrong. Who knows?
Hey, Judd, can we go back to I can never say
Ramana
his name.
Maharishi.
Thank you. Can we go back to his quote, please?
We sure can.
Thank you. So I'm just going to minimize this so I can see that a little better and not look at myself while I talk. So for me, what came up as you were reading this was a little bit of pushback.
Sure.
Ego. And it says the ego, or the separate personal identity, is at the root of all suffering in life. Therefore, it is to be destroyed by any means possible. So I'm just going to give you my take on that, okay?
Great.
My response to that. So as you said, life is suffering. It includes suffering, right? So to say that part of us needs to be, and when I hear a word like destroyed or annihilated or taken out of the equation entirely because it gets in the way and it causes all suffering. Suffering is necessary though, right? So that's how through our suffering is how we learn and grow to the next level of whatever. So to say that we need, I think it should add unnecessary suffering. Maybe the word unnecessary suffering should be included in there. Because suffering is going to be there regardless. It's just how long it's the stickiness of suffering that gets in the way, when we get stuck to it and we stay there longer than we need to, where it becomes harmful and it's not serving us. But suffering in itself is a doorway through that leads to a better something else on the other side of suffering. The learning of the experience lays on the other side of suffering. So to say it needs to be destroyed by any means possible. Sounds a bit harsh to me, 1, and 2. It's not as defined as it should be, or maybe it's taken out of context. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
I think that is an extremely wise comment, and I would agree. Again, I want to hold Ramana Maharishi within his own context of his tradition. He also, like, my fear of what happens when people ego bash or don't take into account the ego is that they shadow all their ego stuff, and therefore it comes out in unhealthy ways.
Right.
So we're going to do I'm going to do a webinar on psychoanalysis and Buddhism. And psychoanalysis has some really good thoughts about this, that it takes a self to transcend a self. And therefore, that's what you're saying. We need to, the ego is real. It's just not fully real. The ego has definitely got to be integrated. And I think you're right that the path of suffering is what takes us to the point where we're willing to ask spiritual questions anyway.
Right.
And I do think that is the ultimate liberation, but I think the ego has a role in that.
Absolutely, it does, and which is where my appreciation for the Enneagram comes in. It's simply casting a light in those shadowy corners of our personalities, right? So not to be fixed so much as to be just recognized and to sit with it, so that the working through of it comes. Yeah. Right? And you're consciously seeing it, asking the right questions, sitting quietly. That's where the meditation contemplation part comes in, so that it says when you're silent, it speaks, right? Yeah. So, and that speaks to intention too. As you go, folks talk about going in with an intention into your meditation or your contemplation or prayer. It's asking the question, but how do you know what question to ask if you go about blindly? So Enneagram, right, like you said, is a gate, and there are many gates, but let's not get stuck at the gate with the number, as you said, but just use it as a tool to, shine some light into those shadowy corners. Yeah,
and as a functional, being able to function better in the relational world. Ramana Maharishi didn't have to worry about that. He didn't have a partner. He had people feeding him, you know? I mean, he didn't have it. Like, it's okay to say, yeah, get rid of the ego and not be married. Right?
His path took him to guru status. Not all of us are going to be gurus
right
not now. Life needs to happen. We still need to interact and play with each other, right?
Right.
So if you're going to go the guru path, by all means, destroy the ego.
Right. Yeah. If you can sit in bliss all the time and not have to interact with anybody, great. Go do that. Yeah.
If you have someone feeding you, hey, by all means, you don't have an ego. But
super.
While we are interacting and playing with each other, we need to know what we bring to the table, the good and the bad, right? The shadowy places too. And if we are aware of those shadowy places, I think we can navigate more intelligently.
Yes.
And with less, causing less harm.
I agree. Yeah. Well, good. Are there any other thoughts about that before we move into actual numbers? Thanks for that, Ida. I think that brings up a really good point. Anybody else want to join in? You're welcome to unmute yourself. Yeah, Andrew.
If I could, yeah. For me, one of the stickiest parts of Eli's book and his framework is the position of the soul, and for good reason. That's tough for us egos to grapple with, but I don't want to go too far into a question on that. But if, as you're going through the numbers, you can bring in any of the soul aspects of those Enneatypes, that would be great for me anyway. Does that make sense?
Like talking about the true character kind of piece of the soul.
Yeah, how whatever messages that Enneatype has for yourself, like, relates to your challenges or so forth. Soul.
Those are the places that we're going to kind of focus. So thanks, Andrew. And Andrew's got his, look at it, he's just taunting all of us that are sitting inside. He's out riding his bike. You shouldn't be able to be riding your bike across a stream and listening to Enneagram conversation at the same time. You've reached enlightenment. Andrew he's about ready to just disappear.
I'm just taking your integral practices to heart.
Beautiful. All right, so let's, here we go. We're going to go into, let me get through this. This may cause some seasickness. Sorry, it's a crash course. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go through each of the numbers, and I'm going to be focusing. These are some charts I really like. They're actually charts for therapists and coaches and counselors. But I'm going to focus in on these charts on this one section, which is called Increasing Presence and Flexibility. This is really how I think Enneagram numbers can grow. And that's why it's related to kind of the spiritual growth piece. So for each of the numbers, they've got what's called saving grace, healing attitude, recognition for growth, spiritual jumpstart, direction of growth, and invitation to abundance. So I want to cover these for each of the numbers really pretty quickly, and then we can stop and talk about them if people want. So this is the one. So the one, remember, is the performer and achiever. They are in the gut triad, the anger triad, and they're known, the basic personality passion is resentment. The fixation is around judgment. But let's look at the positives of their place of growth. Their place of growth, excuse me, their saving grace is, I am objective and sensible. And this is kind of what the character that Andrew's talking about, that this message that they are objective and sensible is really true. That is a true message about who they are. And their healing attitude is maybe others are right. Maybe someone else has a better idea. Maybe others will learn for themselves. Maybe I've done all that can be done. That's really hard for ones to say. And so one of the things, if you're a one, what I want you listening for is what I would call a mantra. And so I'll just give an example here. I'm an Enneagram 7, and what I've developed is a mantra for myself as a spiritual practice. And the mantra is, it is enough. So, and part of my spiritual practice is I will say over and over again, it is enough. It is enough. It is enough. It is enough. So it's a kind of a rewiring of my brain, because my brain as a 7 says it's not enough. There's not enough life. There's not enough energy. There's not enough experience. So you got to go and get it. You got to create it. So what I want you listening for is your own mantra, and it may show up in one of these things. So one's, what may be your mantra? Things are perfect just as they are might be a mantra for a 1. They don't have to fix it. They don't have to change it. It's perfect just as it is. Their spiritual jumpstart is to notice when I'm value judging or condemning myself or others. Because ones do this unconsciously. They are immediately kind of judging the situation or others. And so they have to be very aware of when they start doing that. Their invitation to abundance is to live for a higher purpose, remembering that it is my true nature to be wise, discerning, and patient. And that's the kind of soul that the one does bring, is they're wise, discerning, and patient. Okay, so that's a 1, and that's the places for ones to go. Any questions or thoughts there?
Did you say, Jed, we're going to come back and then review them all?
Well, we can. If you have a comment or thought, feel free to jump in.
So mantra and any other particular spiritual practices that you found that work well for ones?
Well, one of the things that ones often do is you encourage them to keep a gratitude journal. So because ones need to stay in with what is right, what are they grateful for, what is good, because their fixation is around what needs to be fixed in me or in other people. So to replay that is to say, okay, what in this room right now is right? What's beautiful? What am I thankful for? So a gratitude journal is a great way to begin a day or to end a day. I mean, that would be good for all of us, but I think especially good for ones. Mantra wise, I think that's something that everyone has to kind of find. I think this is just what came to me. Life is beautiful. Everything is beautiful. Maybe everything, right? Everything is beautiful. Because what they're doing there is they're looking for it. And that would change the wiring of the brain. So what do you think, Terry?
I like that life is beautiful. And I also, you said, it is enough. For me, the mantra, I am enough. Because I always think that I have to learn something. It's never sufficient. I have to learn something else. I have to do this other thing. I have to experience something else. I have to, whatever, you get the point.
Yeah.
So I am enough would be a good mantra for me. And I'm also curious, but I don't want to take up too much time, about putting some of these things in shadow. I was raised by a number one. And so I've also taken some of my one tendencies and kind of put them into shadow. And for me, the anger and criticism is typically turned inward. So how I fix that, I guess acknowledging is always the first step, right? But
Yeah.
So for me, that's something that I have to work on yeah. Thank you.
If
Well,
I may jump in for a second,
sure.
I'd like to share with Terry is because my 9 falls in that same anger emotive on the Enneagram, and the anger comes from not being able to fix it, not being able to turn it into a positive. And I did some work where what came out of me was I can't fix everybody, and that the frustration of that is what I considered the shadow work. It's just sitting there and understanding that I couldn't do all of it. But if I was in my groundedness, I'm going to be doing everything. I'll be a conduit to touch all those spaces that needs my input. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think you're right, working right on that line also of the 1 and the 2. So a 2 with a 1 wing or a 1 with a 2 wing, that's right at the edge, because their core fixation is that they feel like they're not good enough, or something at the very core of who they are is not right. So that you see how that message then created all of the other stuff they built on that. I've got to fix it. I got to fix me. I'm not good. I'm not right. And the 1 and the 2 have a real similar message there. And you can see, right? So always what I often talk about is go back to the young child that was just coming into awareness of being a self, and that being the first message that they understood, and they fixated on it then. And then from that point on, the child began saying, if I'm going to get love and acceptance, I've got to be good. I've got to be perfect. And I've got to be needed. And so, right, you can see how that's the knot, right? That it gets all tied up there. But if you can go through that knot to, no, you know, what I really am is light and love and grace. And that is the true nature of who I am. It untwines that knot. Then it no longer has to be perfect. It is perfect because it's love and life itself.
Yeah, I'm interested to see with other numbers as well. Like for me, the perfectionist is like morally perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll spend 30 minutes scrubbing out a peanut butter jar. That's that sort of thing. But I'm interested to see how those tendencies show up for other people as well. It's not that my room is perfectly clean and my house is perfectly organized, but you'll never catch me with a piece of litter, or something. So anyway, I think that's probably enough. Thank you, though.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a good description. All right. Are there any other comments? We'll go on to 2. So the 2 is the helper. They're actually in the heart image triad. And so here's some of their advices for growth. The saving grace is I have genuine empathy, which is true. Healing attitude, maybe I could let someone else do this. Maybe this person is actually already showing me love in their own way. Maybe I could do something good for myself too. The spiritual jumpstart, recognition for growth, to recognize my true feelings about myself and others rather than their projected feelings. Spiritual jumpstart is to notice when I'm giving value away to others in the form of flattery. Because what a 2 does is they give away or they care for what they want to receive back to them. And so if they can be aware that they're doing it, then they can also be aware that it's a need they probably have. And then to nurture that, to care for it, to see it. Their direction of growth is I get in touch with my feelings, especially my aggressive ones. I become aware of myself as I really am. I am unconditionally accept myself. I may harness my feelings into creative acts. Invitation to abundance, to nurture myself and others, remembering to be good to myself and have goodwill to others. Again, most of the warning signs for 2 show up is when they don't care for themselves. They've been othering too much. So are there any comments, questions about that, thoughts? Feel free to jump in. I'm checking Facebook. Anybody have a comment, thought there? And again, what might be a mantra that you would want to come up with? I think moving into a creative space is a good spiritual practice for a 2. Because to be creative, you have to drop into yourself. You have to know where you are and know what you're feeling. So creative expression for 2s is usually a good act of self-care. All right, well, let's go on. The 3, so the 3 is the performer achiever. Again, they're in the image heart triad. And here's some of their issues for growth. Their saving grace is my desire to be accepted. Healing attitude, maybe I don't have to be the best. Maybe people will accept me just the way I am. Maybe others' opinions of me aren't so important. Spiritual jumpstart, to notice when I'm trying to be other than who I authentically am. Direction of growth is to the 6. I become committed to something or someone outside of myself, realizing that my value is not diminished by being part of something greater than me. Invitation to abundance is to develop myself and set an example for others, remembering to take pleasure in my existence and to esteem and value others as well. So again, the hitch with the 3 is that they got love by being the best, performing and achieving. And I think it's interesting how like the mantra for a lot of us would come back to that kind of I am enough, right? that I am enough. I am not only enough, I am good. I am beautiful. I am light. Because you see how that unhooks all those other messages, right? The challenge is we don't believe it. The ego doesn't believe it. The ego is be like, well, yeah, but you still better do good on that job review. That's what it does, right? That's the other voice. And that's why all of this, the meditators and stuff will talk about, until you have an experience of being light, the ego will always be the loudest voice. So we can say all day in practice, you are love, you are light. And you can, say that and maybe even believe it. But if you don't know it, if you haven't experienced it, then the loudest voice is not the true voice. The loudest voice is the ego voice.
Right.
And that's the key to spiritual practice. Sitting in the place where that voice is the one that's nurtured the most.
Right.
Thoughts, comments about that?
As a 9, I have learned how, as a healthy 9, I've learned how to not take myself that seriously. I've learned how to, sometimes I just roll my eyes at myself when I see myself acting out, because I can recognize those traits showing up. Pardon, but that comes from having gone into those shadowy places of my personality, of my ego, understanding where they come from, understanding that part is me too, embracing it. And then when it acts out, which it does, I can recognize it. I can recognize it. I can choose to alter it if it is harmful, or I could choose to just roll my eyes at myself and go, oh, I'm in that mood, okay. Right? And so I think that's the work, is not to be attached too much to that trait or that facet of who you are. Because if there's an identification with it, if you think that's all I am, then of course you can't lift yourself up by your own bootstrings, right? You're in it, and that's it. All you can do then, because you so closely identify it, is feel that helplessness. But if you understand it and you've embraced it, and it's that glow, the pain window image comes to mind that you had up, the glow work. So if you've done the glow work through your meditation and understanding that all of it is part of the game, every bit of who you are the sum of your experiences, the parenting, your ancestors, your legacy, the roles you're playing as a female, as a mother, as a whatever. All of it is part of who you are. But if you identify and attach and cling to one of those roles or feeling or facet of your personality, then the struggle is real. Then the suffering becomes unnecessary and longer than it should. But if you can watch it play out and even embrace that, the suffering comes and goes, because then you understand that's part of the trip.
Yeah. And that's what Helen Palmer, in Helen Palmer's work, she always talks about cultivating the capacity of the witness. So what you've just talked about is I can watch myself show up. And unless you can cultivate the witness, you are all of those things. You don't have them.
That is where the true I is. Yeah. Everything that follows the I am are the roles of your personality, right? Are the facets to your ego. anything that follows the words I am ... fill in the blank. But staying in the I am and not attaching to whatever follows the I am, you can watch what follows play out, and you can actually intelligently navigate it because you're not attached to it. It's like, are you in the driver's seat or are you in the passenger seat? You both have the same view.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's why it's important to distinguish the difference between detached and unattached.
True.
Yeah. Because detached is it's a running from.
Right. I pretend it's not there.
Yeah. And that's a shadowing. Right. But unattached means, oh, I watch it. I see it.
There I am.
Yeah. Look at me. There I go again.
Yes,
I say that all the time. Look what I just did again. So yeah, exactly. And that's the
I don't want to hold you up yet, Dad, but that's also the place where true connection, right? Right.
Say again? What was that, Ida?
I was just going to say that's also, it sounds completely opposite, or two ends of the polarity of being the watcher and not being in your bag of skin, but also being the bag of skin, understanding that you need your bag of skin to be here, right?
Yeah. The both and.
Yeah.
Being the ego and that which watches the ego. So let's keep going. The 4, and we got, I'll go through these pretty quickly. We got about 15 minutes left. The 4 on the Enneagram is the tragic romantic, and they're the ones that are over-identified with their emotional states. So the saving grace is I have self-awareness, which is really true about 4s. Trues have a really good sense of who they are. They've spent time looking at all of that. Recognition for growth, recognizing my authentic positive qualities, because 4s can fixate on the darker parts and sometimes over-accentuate those darker elements. So noticing their authentic positive qualities. Spiritual jumpstart, to notice I am making negative comparisons, which is kind of the fixation that 4s get into. Direction of growth is to 1, I actualize myself by focusing upon something objective, something beyond my feelings and my imaginations. I move from self-absorption to principled action. And that's really important for 4s because they can get lost in their feeling states. And again, there's nothing wrong with, they have a great feeling states and they're very articulate with those, very creative with those, but they can become like obsessive and fixating, leading them to over-identify with those and not identify with their rational mind that can make choices not based upon feeling states, but can make rational choices that are thought through. So it's not to dismiss their heart, it's just to put their heart in right balance with their mind. Invitation to abundance, to let go of the past and be renewed by my experiences. Remember to be forgiving, to use everything in my life for growth and renewal. Any 4s want to comment there, or anybody want to mute yourself and have a comment? All right. Number 5s. 5, this moves into the head and the doing triad. Again, they have a fixation in the thinking, anxiety triad, and the 5s do that by going into their thinking mind, is the place that they retreat to. Their saving graces. I have awareness of my own distortions. 5s really have they're great philosophers. They're great thinkers. Nietzsche was a 5. They're very, they know emptiness. 5 is the Buddha was a 5. A lot of Buddhist practice is very 5 oriented. They like that. They like sitting kind of in emptiness. That can be positive, or it can be a retreat, right? It can be a detaching that 5s can do out of anxiety, a retreat from the world. So it can look healthy, but it may not come from a healthy place. And I think that's what 5s have to be. They have to tend to that in their own lives. Healing attitude, maybe I can trust people and let them know what I need. Maybe I can live happily in the world. Again, living out in the world creates anxiety for them sometimes. Maybe my future will be okay, because they can get into some of the skeptical, negative thinking about the world and the way it's going. They, especially 5s with 6s, they are kind of the great skeptics, intellectual skeptics. So 5s with the 6 wings need to be aware of that. Recognizing for growth my physical presence, feelings, and needs. 5s can disassociate from their bodies. And so bringing a 5 into their body can be very helpful. Tending to their body can be helpful. To notice when I'm over-interpreting my experience. They love to be in their heads around interpreting what's happening, not necessarily what's happening. So they can retreat and think about what they experienced, but sometimes can retreat from the experience itself too quickly. Direction of growth is towards an 8. I realize that I do not have to know absolute everything before I can act, because 5s can get paralyzed in thinking about things. I understand that I will be able to solve problems as they arise. My confidence comes from connection to the world. Invitation to abundance is to observe myself and others without judgment or expectation, remembering to be engaged with reality and contemplating the world's riches. 1s and 5s can be judgmental in a similar kind of way. That's one of the times 1s and 5s test similar, because there can be this kind of critical, judging, mental processing that 5s and 1s share. Any questions, thoughts with 5s? You're welcome to unmute yourself. If not, we'll keep going. We got a few more minutes. The 6.
Somebody asked a question for a 4, so a spiritual practice for a 4. It popped up while you were talking. I don't know who it was.
Oh, spiritual practice for 4. That came up. Yeah, thank you. Let's see, a spiritual practice for 4. There's another chart that I have that looks at Horneverian groups that has some good spiritual practices. So let's look what the 4 is the withdrawn type. So here the 4, type 4 on the other hand prefers the feeling center and uses the thinking center and imagination to ramp up the intensity of feeling. Type 4s withdraw to protect their feelings, to live in the imaginary world. So here's some practices for 4s. Practice looking around you and do what needs to be done. Pick up the pop can, throw it in the recycling, clean your room, fix the car. These are not spiritual practice they probably would like, which means that's probably why they're spiritual practice, right? Because it's a practical kind of thing. It's kind of a taking action rather than retreating. It's an engaging rather than retreating into their imagination. Move your body, feel your body, dance, walk, do Tai Chi. Get out and be with people once in a while. And here's the, 4s that go real deep into their darker emotions can withdraw. They can be like 5s and withdraw from people quite a bit. So get out and be with people. Speak for yourself. And 4s have to be careful because they move to a 2 in stress. So 4s have to be careful not to be too codependent, to be meeting other people's needs like the 2. If you meditate, make it an active form. this is because a lot of times 4s, 9s, and 5s, which are the withdrawal types, they like that kind of alone meditation time. But it can come from not a healthy place. Again, that's why they have to watch that. And 4s, if you're going to do a meditation, it may be better to stay in the outer world, moving your body, rather than going into your inner world. Because the inner world is a place of escape. So go into the outer world as a spiritual practice. So maybe that helps with the 4. I hope so. And it can maybe help with all the withdrawn types. So this is the Hornevrian groups. I've talked about these before. You have the aggressive types, and there's certain practices for them. 7, 8s, and 3s. Withdrawal types, 5, 4, and 9. And the compliant types, which are the 1, 2, and 6s. And there's different kind of spiritual practices for different ones of those. So let's keep going back to the 5s. Oh, that was this. That's the 6. So we're on the 6s. I'll go through these real quick. Spiritual jumpstart to notice when I'm becoming dependent on something for external support. 6s tend to externalize their authority and place it on outside people. So bringing their authority within themselves, to trust themselves because they haven't trusted themselves in the past, is a practice. Recognizing support of my own inner guidance is really important. Invitation to abundance, to have faith in myself and trust in the goodness of life, remembering to be courageous and capable of dealing with life under all conditions. So that's the 6, kind of learning to trust their inner voice instead of externalizing it. Any comments there for 6s?
So Jed, I'll just ask real quick. So if you wanted to support a 6, for instance, what are some things that might be supportive for them in times of crisis? Like right now, a lot of 6s are probably really very anxious about what's going on in the world. What's something I might say to them to be supportive?
Well, that anxious 6s are the most anxious anyway on the Enneagram type. They deal with anxiety. One is to be especially if 6s feel like the institutions around them that they've trusted in are crumbling, right? And we do see that. Like, I can't trust government. My church isn't there anymore. They are institutional builders because they give their trust over to institutions to protect them. So I would say, helping them sit with that anxiety and helping them to trust themselves, reassuring them that they have the resources they need within themselves and around them to be supported. So I think affirming them, I think listening to their anxiety, because I think they have a lot of it. Maybe helping them think through the supports they do have, because sometimes they can get skeptical. So reassuring them about the supports. Helping them to look on not an unrealistic bright side, but a true bright side. Because they forget those. They can be skeptical. So I think those are some ways. Especially the 6s that may be in your churches or your institutions, they may be having a really hard time right now. Sevens, so I went through mine. Recognition for personal growth is recognizing personal pain and anxiety. A lot of times 7s can be acting out of that, but not even know that they're feeling it because they've disassociated from it. So for sevens is to know where we are, stay in our bodies, notice our anxiety. Spiritual jumpstart, to notice when I'm anticipating what I'm going to do next. This is horrible for me because I do it all of the time. I'm always thinking about what is going to happen next. There's been a couple times, even during this webinar, that I've thought, what am I doing later tonight? I've got another meeting. And then I start thinking, oh, what am I doing after that meeting? All while I'm just sitting right here, you know. Those are immediately things that start going in my head. So notice when I'm doing that may mean I'm anxious. I may not be, but it may be. Yes.
What we might think is a weakness is at the very same time a strength when it's flipped the other way, right? It's like what married couples say, you know, I used to love this about him and now it just annoys the heck out of me. The same trait. So if you understand that whatever you look at, just shifting your perspective of it, what you think might be a weakness, I'm going to tell you is the very thing that's going to serve you if you flip it. Right?
Yeah,
so
and that's my saving grace.
Right. It's
I have enthusiasm for things I love.
Exactly, which would explain the anticipation. Oh my gosh, what's next, right? It's not that you don't want to be where your feet are. You always like a kid in a candy store. What's next? So if it induces anxiety, it's just shining that light on that. It's like, oh, what is this? Oh, okay, no, it's all right. It's just me being excited.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's noticing whether or not what's happening is unhealthy for me or other people. And that's the key, right? Because because I'm really good at creating a lot of fun things, right? Like, what's the next webinar we're going to do?
Yeah, you don't want to get rid of it.
Right.
It serves you in some other places. Yeah.
All right, I got to get through. I got two more. The 9, the 8s, the boss, the challenger. Saving grace, I have enthusiasm for things I love. Oh, that's a 7. Go to the 8. The 8s, I know that confrontations threaten my survival. Because a lot of times confrontations for the 8, they don't experience a lot of times the harm that comes out of those confrontations. So the awareness of that is helpful. Recognition for growth, recognizing my own vulnerability and need for nurturing. 8s can have such a tough outer shell around them that a lot of times people don't think they have any needs or don't know how to hug somebody that's prickly. And yet there is a definite need for that, for their softness and to be nurtured and cared for, that 8s don't seem like they need. The vulnerability that comes with needs being 8s being able to name their need is really high. So you can see how they may shadow it or distance from that need. Spiritual jumpstart, to notice when I'm trying to force things or control life. Yeah, I mean, that's their noticing that, because that's so much of where their fear and anxiety is coming from, the threats around them. Invitation to abundance, to remember that my strength brings responsibilities toward others and must be used with compassion and humility. And that's important for the 8. All right, I'm going to move to the 9. The 9s are the peacemakers, and they're again back up in the anger, instinct, gut triad. That's where their fixation resides. The saving grace is I'm receptive to change because I value relationships, which is very true of 9s, and that is a grace for them. Healing attitude, maybe I can make a difference. Maybe I need to get energized and be involved. Maybe I'm more powerful than I realize, right? For them to find that energy, that passion. Where's the passion for the 8s? Because they've often disconnected from it. To notice when I'm resisting being affected by experiences. That's the spiritual jumpstart. Have I so zoned out that I'm not actually being moved by my experiences? I'm just kind of watching them out there, not engaging them. They move to type 3, right? Connectivity, connecting with my vitality, doing their to-do list, knowing their direction, directional energy. Sometimes I can feel like masculine energy for 9s. There is a masculine energy and agency, moving forward, that 9s might want to tap into. Invitation to abundance, to actively engage myself in the struggle to create real peace in the world, not just their own inner peace. Remembering that my participation in life is necessary and vital. A lot of times people in relationship with 9s feel like they have to amp up everything to just get to where they get some reaction from 9s. Like, give me something, 9, give me something. I want to be in relationship. Because usually it just keeps just dropping down into the what, no, wait. No pushback. And 9s need to realize that people want some pushback because they want to be in relationship.
I'm going to jump in here only because I'm a 9. And I laugh because, yes, there's so much resonance to what you're saying. And going back to the saving grace of a 9, when that strength works in the opposite way, I tend to be very easily molded around the other person in a relationship. And because of experiences, that molding, we tend to forget ourselves or lose ourselves. And so that's where that distancing comes in, watching myself play the role in the relationship. But to your point, for the other person in a relationship with me as a 9, I can totally see, and that has come up several times, where they're not getting the feedback as the other person in the relationship. So yes, I think it's the fear of losing oneself completely in the other person, or the other polarity, which is pulling away and creating more distance, even though they may be participating. Mm-hmm. So I totally recognize that as a 9, yes.
Yeah. Well, okay, people, we're about out of time. We are out of time. Are there any kind of closing thoughts? I think the kind of the image that I want to leave us with is kind of let's end with this image of who we are, right? So we are the light that flows through us. We are the stained glass window with all of our personality, with all of our unique textures and colors. And we are the process of flow of the light behind us that we are flowing through us to create a more just, loving, compassionate, passionate world. And we need to tend to all of these parts of who we are in order that we can be the fullness of who we are. It's been a real joy. Again, I hope you'll join us every Friday starting this summer. And it'll be great to nurture the wisdom of the Enneagram. I would really encourage you to think about inviting somebody that you think might be interested in Enneagram work. It's not only helpful for us personally, but it's helpful interpersonally to create relationships of compassion and empathy for one another. So thanks for being on today, and blessings. You're welcome to join us back tonight at 6:30. We've got what's called the Interfaith Paths to Peace Community of Practice, called the Round Table, where we're bringing together peace and justice makers from around our city simply to get to know each other. So we'll just spend some time connecting with each other, trusting that good work and transformation in our community happens in the space of interpersonal relationships with people we may share passion and a desire to create change with. So welcome to join us back tonight at 6:30. Peace be with you, be well, and be whole. Thanks for joining in today.
Thanks, Judd.
Thank you all. And a final view of all the beautiful participants that were on today. Thank you. Hello, everybody. Great group today.